Hello, listeners, and welcome to today's edition of the Peggy Smedley Show. As always, I'm your host, Peggy Smedley. Today, we're taking a hard look at the next frontier of AI. Not the models, not the hype, but the governance that will determine whether AI agents actually help the business or quietly create more challenges. We're talking about control planes, vendor silos, lifecycle, blind spot. What happens when an agent makes a bad call? And the questions every CEO should be asking. We really need to know what they're thinking these days. And as companies race to scale agents, the real issue isn't capability, it's whether the right controls are in place before things break. The voice helping us unpack all of this joins us now is Andreas Welsch. She's a two-time author and Chief Human Agentic AI Officer at Intelligence Briefings. Andreas, welcome to the show. You and I have been spending a lot of time together lately, so I'm glad you're on the show today. Thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Peggy. And indeed, we spent quite a bit of time together at IBM's Think event in Boston last week, and I was so excited to finally meet you in person. It's been a while since I've been on the show the first time, so it's always nice when someone invites you back. So I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, it was so much fun. We were running around. I'm telling you, we were busy last week at IBM Think, but it was fun. You were such a delight to spend some time with, and we had so much more questions that you and I were engaging with, and we learned so much at IBM Think. And I thought it would be fun that after you and I were there to really talk a little bit more about I guess maybe here's my question. Let's start at the top. Maybe that's the best way for all of our listeners, because we're going to spend some time together here now, is how do you explain, after you had all this time last week and you've been writing books on this and you get it, but how do you explain an AI agent control plane in real business terms? Everybody's talking about it, and why should every leader, not just IT, be paying attention? I think that's the important question. Maybe we need to start with today's conversation.
I love it because it's so important at this moment in time when we have so many leaders. We have the C-suite pushing AI into the organization. We have board members asking the CEOs, what's our AI strategy? They've been asking for a while, but now it gets to this point of agentic AI where software is able to make decisions more autonomously or work on more complex tasks and then bring it back to us as human users. But with all of that push, there comes the question of who's actually in charge here. How do we even know which agents we have in the business, what they're allowed to do, what systems they have access to? Are they allowed to read information? Are they allowed to write information? And setting these guardrails, setting the right governance model that on one hand mitigates risk, but at the same time doesn't stifle innovation, that's really key. So something that I've seen at IBM Think last week was IBM's Watson X Orchestrate tool and platform that IBM positions as a control plane. So control plane means whether you're in T or whether you're a finance leader or HR leader, this gives you visibility into what are the agents that I have in my business function, who's building them, what are they allowed to do, and how well are they working.
And that's a great point, because you have to understand what are you dealing with, because if it's all a mess, you're dealing with nothing but a bunch of silos and a lot of misinformation, a lot of misdata. You're not getting the right answers at the right time when you need them.
Exactly. So it's something that I wrote about in my latest book called the Human Agentic AI Edge, because I saw that organizations are inviting these new digital workers into the workplace, but without governance and guardrails, it's equivalent to inviting any stranger from the street into your office, right? We don't do that. People have ID cards. They go through background checks. They have certain skills that they need to have if they work in finance or in accounting. With agents, if anybody can build them, how do you really know what's happening and if these results are trustworthy, if the agents are trustworthy, or are they going off the rails? So that's where this part of governance comes in. So we can have an identity in that sense for this agent to say this is trusted, this is verified. By the way, one point that really struck me was Pearson's CTO, Dave Treed, who was on stage at Think. And he said we're working together on certifying agents' skills. So probably many of you are familiar with these digital badges and credentialing tools like Credly, which Pearson owns. So they're going so far as to say we can certify that an agent has a certain skill set, has access to a certain kind of information, and can perform certain tasks that its developer assigned it to do. Now with the badge, with the digital badge, we can confirm that the agent is capable of doing this. We've tested it, and you can trust this agent to bring it into your organization, to bring it into your workflow. And to me, that's really the next step in elevating these agents to almost like a first-class citizen or first-class user.
And that's an important point. And you and I were talking about this because that now says, what do we have to do in that governance idea for tools to be able to manage those agents and build inside the entire ecosystem? Let's talk more about that, because it's not just one agent, it's about managing the entire ecosystem as you build upon that.
Oh yeah, certainly it gets more complex. It's not just adding additional agents, but the complexity scales more exponentially with multiple agents in a process, in a workflow, talking to each other, accessing data, and giving you insights. So that understanding of what are the agents doing and what is the risk that we're also inviting into this process when failure compounds from one node or from one hub to the next, from one agent to the next, is the critical part.
And I think if we address that, because I can think at some points, if we don't have governance, while it's a positive thing, it can also create some challenges. So we have to look at this as, how do we have to manage blind spots? How do we see the future? And how do we actually look at this today and managing every agent that we're doing across the enterprise?
Absolutely. I don't think there's any way around this. If you want to make sure your company, on one hand, thrives in this age of innovation, but at the same time still thrives when there are some tangible and real risks.
So let's talk about life cycle, because I think if we continue on with all of this, we have to look at, what are we doing next? What does the full life cycle of an AI agent really look like? When I think about this, I'm still trying to process from creation to retirement. In my mind, I'm going, what are the risks that show up? Because we're thinking, there's always saying opportunities. But at the same time, companies have to think about the steps they take. We're always saying we're trying to understand it, but you can't just go from A to Z. You have to have a process. So have you thought about what you would say to companies and how and what we've been looking at in this process right now?
I was saying, first of all, let's get one thing out of the way and let's get that clear and unmistakably clear. Agents are software. They're components, they're code, they're algorithms, they're zeros and ones. They're not humans. They're not workers in the same sense. But where I feel the analogy works really well is leaning on tried and tested HR approaches and processes. You said from creating to retiring, right? Something like the HR macro process, hire to retire, comes to mind. Again, if you build on these constructs that we have for human employees and you see how can we apply them to agents, that makes this leap a lot shorter and a lot easier. So first of all, identify what is the business need that we have. Are there tasks that are repetitive, tasks that involve some kind of variance in complexity? It doesn't have to be the most complex process, but it's usually a little more complex than if this happens, then do that rules. Right? There's some variation in this process. Agents can deal with the variation very well and a lot better than strict rule-based systems can. Then it's about, let's test our hypothesis. Can we build an agent that we give access, for example, to our HR tool to help us with the reporting or with candidate scheduling, for example? So what does it mean? What kind of information would the agent need to have access to? Is it reading? Is it writing information? Who works with the agent? Make sure that you bring the business stakeholders into this conversation from the very beginning and throughout your building of the agent, because the more ownership, the more participation they feel, the stronger that connection is going to be, and the more likely they're going to use it and use it well, rather than see it as a threat or something that replaces their own roles. Okay, so you've identified a need, you've brought in the subject matter experts, you're testing this together with your IT team. What can we actually build here? How does this work? The next thing is, how do we maintain the knowledge and keep it current once the agent is actually deployed? Because policies change, data changes, decisions change over time. So keeping an operational loop of maintaining these agents is becoming more critical as well. It's not just a once and done type of thing. We've built the agent, we've given it to you, HR, and that's it. We're out of the loop. No, you really need to come back periodically and see, do these recommendations? Do these insights still make sense? Do the decisions make sense that the agents either propose or take? And then all the way to the end. A couple of months ago, I had a good conversation with the director of AI and automation at a large communications firm. And she said, at least half of our agents that we built over the last 12 months don't exist anymore. We retired them. We subsumed them in larger constructs or agents. So don't get too attached to the fact that you've built this agent and it's going to be there for a long time. This is not ERP. This is not finance software. It's not supply chain software. Be prepared that these agents evolve as your processes evolve, as your learning evolves in the organization. And at that point, retire and replace them with the next agent or with the next more capable agent.
That's a really very good point, because we hear the word retirement and it's so emotionally attaching to us as humans. That's why when we talk about agents, the word retire has a different meaning than retirement. And so that's a really great point you started out with the conversation, because I think we need to separate ourselves as that software statement that you made very much from the beginning. And that's why that human in the loop concept with this is so critical, because the speed of change when we think about AI is very critical. And we need to understand that from the very beginning as we develop these agents, because that change is going to happen. The learning, the development, the whole process that you just described is so critical, especially as we try to understand as we advance and learn and use and apply. That's the benefit of what AI is with us, working with us as a companion, not replacing us. And that's the process as you just described.
Absolutely. And I would say it's important to have some structure in place before you scale your AI or your agentic AI program. If if you're designing this as a free-for-all and everyone can try out their own things, it'll be very difficult to rein everything in, to get everybody back on the same page, to get them to adhere to standards. So again, it doesn't have to be a 50-page document and rule book that everybody needs to adhere to, but you should have some kind of guardrail and guidelines of, this is what we want our agents to do. Here's how you register them. Here's how you bring them under management. So again, it's something that we can govern, something we have insight to, and we know who's responsible for this agent. What does this agent do? And doing this early will help you scale with a lot more clarity and usually with a lot less headaches as you go along.
Andreas, that really raises a very good point about guardrails, but also raises that idea of when an agent makes a bad call. And we always talk about AI is replacing, but we have to really look at the bigger picture about a bad call or an expensive mistake. We always say, make mistakes, I guess, fast and furious, that idea in learning. But now we're thinking, who's actually accountable in this world that we're talking about? And I think it's fail fast concept, but at the same time, we're talking about AI. So I think, how does the shift of governance mature in this? And I think it's an interesting question, because as I was hearing you talk a little bit, what was going through my mind is really talking about, how do we get the entire organization to say, we want to support AI, but at the same time, we want to learn at the same time as individuals, as humans, but we as human creators, but we also want the same concept of trusting AI. So, but we have to have governance, and we have to have guardrails, and it's very challenging to know when to trust, when to let go, but at the same time, when there's a mistake, who's responsible? How do we know? How do we feel about that? So it's a heavy question.
There's a lot in that for sure. I would say it really depends on the level of complexity and risk involved. You don't have to start with the most complex with the riskiest process. It's not about using an agent to apply payments to your accounts or send out invoices, send out payments that you can undo, right? Don't start there necessarily. But it's a mix of things. One is provide adequate training and enablement for your users. First of all, the ones that are expected to build agents. If you're democratizing that, almost like citizen development, it has to be a lot more enablement. Even if you roll out Copilot and say, hey, here's some agents that you can build. How do I do that? How do I build a good agent? So training and upskilling should be the core foundation for anyone in the organization. The second one where I see organizations succeed is provide sandboxes. And here's an area where you can build your first agent, but maybe it goes against dummy data or some test data, or it's in a controlled environment where it doesn't do any harm if it goes off the rails. So start learning to work with this agent, improve it, see where it works well, see where it fails, and do that in a controlled environment. Next, put it into an environment that, like a production environment, where you have access to real systems and real data and monitor it. We've seen these concepts in many different variations of IT and software projects, things like hypercare, steady state. Probably many of you are familiar with these terms, but when you roll it out for maybe the first 2 weeks, 4 weeks, really monitor very closely. What does this agent do? Maybe have a person more in the loop, review, confirm, correct, so you know how well does this agent work? Where does it work well? Where do we need to change something? And continue iterating all the way to a point where you're more comfortable letting this agent take on larger chunks of work, working more independently. And again, and I'm thinking almost like an intern in that sense that you have on your team. You wouldn't let them write checks on day number one on behalf of your company, but with more confidence, with more experience, with more trust, because you've seen how this process works. And we build more trust in agents too, and give them more agency in that sense.
We learned a lot about this past week about the power of data from Andre Agassi, tennis, power of what's in tennis in your pocket, the data in your pocket. We learned a lot about what was happening at Cleveland Clinic. We learned Aramco, the power of data in general. But now when you couple all that data and what takes next with how we're taking agents and AI, this orchestration race, so to speak. But what happens now when vendors look to figure out how they go next, couple the next solutions that have to come to market in a way that truly serves an entire enterprise? Nothing is done by itself. There's a lot of collaboration that has to come together. Nothing is siloed. A lot of these companies said they have to collaborate. It's no longer one and done. It's got to be a lot of people coming together. Are we still in that real learning stage of how much data is used, how much collaboration? Because companies and enterprises are learning we're all in this together because we're all moving at a pace. We think it's fast, but we're all still learning together.
To me, that was one of the most encouraging things to hear last week, that organizations, that leaders are working across their functional silos. By the way, it's one of the concepts in my first book, the AI Leadership Handbook. After I've talked to more than 60 AI leaders in preparation of this book, they all shared, hey, you have to work together. Yes, there's an AI leadership role in larger organizations, but that's where all the threads run together. They need to work across HR and finance and supply chain and sales and all these other departments. So to me, it's great and very encouraging to see that organizations have started to embrace this. But the thing is also this, right? It's not just one department's task alone. The data that you mentioned, right? Agassi talked a lot about giving access to the best tennis coaches based on experience, based on large data volumes, giving feedback and the like. That's very encouraging too. So really this momentum in the industry to see in the realization, yeah, it's not just a tech problem, it's an everyone problem, which makes this so important.
Andreas Welsch, Chief Human Agentic AI Officer at Intelligence Briefing. I loved all the time. We were out of it. We run out of time. You have to come back. We got to keep talking about this because I think there's so much we learned last week, so much we'll continue to learn. Where can our listeners get your books, get more information on you, and continue this amazing conversation we had today?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. If you'd like to continue the conversation, you find me on LinkedIn. Also go to my website, intelligence-briefing.com, to learn more about the books, workshops, trainings, and everything that I help business leaders now figure out with AI. How do we bring our people on board? What's our strategy? And most of all, where is all of this going, right? That's the big question that we're all still looking to answer, and the answers are being written day by day. So
that is so true. Andreas, thank you so much. All right, listeners, that is all the time we have for today. Make sure to share and subscribe to our episodes each week. Share your thoughts with me on X or at connectedworld.com and on LinkedIn. Please check out our website at connectedworld.com, our show website at peggysmedleyshow.com. Remember, we broadcast live every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Central, or you can follow our podcasts on every Thursday. This is the Peggy Smedley Show, your voice for our connected world. And remember, with great technology comes great responsibility. Have an awesome week.